February 25th, 1964, Miami Beach. 9:45 p.m. The air inside the convention center is so thick with tobacco smoke and sweat you could cut it with a knife. In the center of this chaos stands Sonny Liston, a man like a mountain, a world champion with the shadow of the mob and 45 crushing victories looming behind him. Liston isn't just a boxer, he is the personification of primal terror. His fists are the size of cannonballs, and his gaze makes referees forget the rules. Everyone in this arena is certain. Tonight, a murder will take place in the ring. The victim is already here. 22-year-old Cassius Clay, whom the press calls a loud-mouthed clown, is raving as if he's just been released from a psychiatric ward. He screams, spits, and promises to destroy the big, ugly bear. But look closer at his right hand. Clay is clutching a small fragment of an ordinary graphite pencil. This detail seems absurd, redundant, almost pathetic against the backdrop of championship belts. Why does he have it? Does he intend to draw in the heat of the slaughter? Or is it part of some occult ritual? The spectators laugh, dismissing it as another cheap stunt. But this tiny object will become the key to the most massive psychological hack in sports history. While the crowd waits for a bloody climax, something defying logic is happening inside Clay. Why did his pulse jump to 120 beats per minute at the weigh-in? The doctors are terrified. They whisper that the boy has had a nervous breakdown from fear. They are certain he is petrified of Liston. But what if this extreme heart rate isn't a sign of panic, but a conscious engine start? It would seem the answer is obvious. Clay is scared to death. No, when one reporter stepped closer, he heard not groans of fear, but an icy, monotonous whisper Clay was addressing to himself, staring at that very piece of pencil. Everyone thought they were seeing a teenager's tantrum, but they were actually watching a surgeon already beginning to cut open the champion's psyche without anesthesia. Sonny Liston, used to enemies freezing before his power, for the first time encountered something he could not classify. He looked at Clay and saw madness, and madness is the only thing that cannot be intimidated. But was Clay truly mad? Or was it the world's most expensive piece of acting, where the stake was his life? At one point, Clay abruptly went silent and looked Liston straight in the pupils. In that moment, the noise of the arena dissolved. Liston expected the boy to look away. Everyone always looked away, but Cassius didn't just look. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy, but the predatory grin of a man who knows a secret about you that could destroy your life. And at that moment, a whisper swept through the hall. The commission wants to cancel the fight. The official reason? The challenger's mental state. Everyone was sure Clay had deliberately driven himself into this state to avoid the beating. He wanted the fight canceled. It seemed the only logical explanation for his strange behavior. But when the officials approached him to announce the disqualification, Clay did something that made everyone freeze. He didn't make excuses. He didn't calm down. He did something so shocking that Liston, for the first time in his life, took a step back, covering himself with a towel. What happened in the next 10 seconds overturned the perception of boxing forever. You thought he came here to fight? You were wrong. He came to commit a crime against human nature itself, using only his voice and that strange, sharp fragment of graphite. What did he do with it? And why, at that exact second, did the great and terrible Sonny Liston realize he had already lost a fight that hadn't even begun? The answer lay not in the power of the punch, but in how Clay used the silence that followed his scream. In that silence, Liston heard something that terrified him more than any knockout. He heard his own reality crumbling. And while you try to understand how a pencil fragment can defeat a monster, remember, that night in Miami, it wasn't a boxer who entered the ring. Something entered the ring that cannot be touched, but that can break bones with its mere presence. Are you ready to find out what darkness actually lurked behind Muhammad Ali's dazzling smile? Because what happened in the locker room a minute before the walkout won't be shown in any documentary. It was the beginning of the end of the era of strength, and the beginning of the era of mental terror. And the first blow was struck not with a glove, but with a word that pierced Liston through. Do you feel that cold in your gut? That is the very feeling the champion experienced when he realized he wasn't facing a man. He was facing his worst nightmare, which had learned how to speak. And that nightmare had just whispered his sentence to him. The sound of the bell that night in Miami didn't ring like the start of a sporting event, but like the signal for the surgical trepanation of Sonny Liston's consciousness. Liston lunges forward, his fists cutting the air with a terrifying whistle, but time and again he hits nothing but empty space. Why does the most dangerous man on the planet suddenly look like a clumsy child trying to catch a sunbeam? The whole world thinks it's about Cassius Clay's foot speed, but the truth is hidden much deeper, right under the skin of his left palm. Remember that graphite pencil fragment he was clutching in the locker room? Right before entering the ring, Clay did something strange. He scratched a single digit on the inside of his glove with it. The spectators saw only a dancing boxer, but Liston saw something else. Every time Clay entered a clinch, he whispered into the champion's ear, not insults, but the exact coordinates of his own collapse. He wasn't just predicting the round, he was making Liston believe that time was his personal enemy, one that had already made a deal with Clay. But was it just a bluff? The answer might seem obvious, but then the first break occurs. Liston, who never knew fatigue, starts gasping for air as early as the second round. This isn't physiology, it's the pure chemistry of fear. Clay used a technique that would later be called sensory overload. He talked constantly, in the ring, in the heat of battle. His mouth didn't close for a second, creating a white noise that paralyzed Liston's analytical abilities. Every 3 seconds, a new question thrown right in the champion's face. Why are you breathing so slow, Sonny? Can you feel your legs turning to lead? Is that the smell of your defeat? Ask yourself honestly, what would you do in Liston's place if the man you considered a clown suddenly started describing your internal sensations more accurately than your own doctor? You would start to doubt reality. And at that moment, Clay delivers his main blow, not with a glove, but with a psychological dagger. He suddenly stops dancing and freezes right in front of Liston, hands down. Is it suicide? The crowd gasped, expecting the champion to take the braggart's head off. But Liston, he just froze. He was so disoriented by this violation of all boxing rules that his brain simply hit an error. In that moment, Clay wasn't just dominating, he was rewriting the code of boxing. He turned the ring into an interrogation room, where the spotlight shone only in Liston's eyes. Do you think Ali was a kind hero, fighting for people's rights? Here lies the Santa Barbara effect. In reality, during those minutes in the ring, there was the most sophisticated sadist in sports history. He deliberately didn't finish Liston when he was open. He wanted the champion to feel every second of his humiliation, so that he himself, of his own free will, would want to end this existence. Ali played with him like a cat with a half-dead mouse, and his charisma, at that moment, was just a shiny wrapper for ice-cold cruelty. But why then, after the fourth round, did Clay himself suddenly start screaming that he was blind? His eyes were burning. He demanded the fight be stopped. He was in a panic. It seemed the plan had failed, and the magic was broken. The spectators were in shock. Had Liston used poison on his gloves? Or was it divine intervention punishing Clay for his pride? It looked as if the great manipulator had fallen into his own trap. But when trainer Angelo Dundee literally pushed the blinded Clay out for the fifth round, something unthinkable happened. Instead of falling, Clay started moving by sound. He heard Liston's breathing. He felt the vibration of the ring. And then Liston realized his opponent was dangerous even without sight. This was the final break. Liston realized he was fighting not a man, but a phenomenon of nature that could not be blinded or stopped. And while you think this was the peak of the drama, know this: the most terrifying thing happened in Liston's corner before the sixth round. There was no blood, No broken bones. There was a silence that was louder than any scream. The world champion, the man the Mafia feared, simply refused to go out. He didn't lose technically. He annihilated as a persona. And while Clay celebrated, wiping his eyes, in his jacket pocket left in the locker room, that same graphite fragment still lay. What was it actually for? Did Ali know in advance that Liston would give up exactly like that? And was this detail just part of a larger, more frightening plan that was only beginning to unfold? We have only touched the surface of his mental terror, for Ali's next opponent would face something far more sophisticated than just words in the ring. Are you ready to see how Ali turned boxing into a weapon of mass psychological destruction from which there was no escape? Look at his hands at this moment. They are not just raised in victory. They are clutching invisible threads that he will pull for the whole world for the next 30 years. But what price did he pay for this right, to be a god in a hell he created himself? The answer to that question will make you look differently at every word he says in the future. After his triumph over Liston, the world expected Muhammad Ali, who had now officially changed his name and faith, to become a merciful king. But this is where the darkest chapter of his ascent begins, where charisma turns into a sharpened blade. Have you ever wondered why, before every interview, Ali would pull a perfectly clean white silk handkerchief from his inner pocket and slowly wipe his forehead, even if there wasn't a single drop of sweat on it? This detail seemed like an aesthetic whim, but for his next victims, it became a symbol of their upcoming powerlessness. The handkerchief always remained dry because Ali stopped sweating from fear. He began making others sweat just by being in the same room as them. But was this handkerchief just an accessory, or did it hide something Ali used to suppress the will of his brothers in the ring? One would think that after defeating the mob champion, Ali would have united people, but instead he chose the path of total psychological annihilation of those closest to him. His next target, Floyd Patterson. Patterson was gentle, devout, and everyone's favorite good guy. Ali knew this and used it as the entry point for his mental virus. He didn't just promise to defeat Floyd, he publicly stripped him of the right to his own name and dignity, calling him a rabbit and an Uncle Tom. Why such cruelty to a man who had done him no wrong? The answer lies in the dehumanization strategy. Ali understood that if you strip an opponent of their human form in the eyes of the public and themselves, then what enters the ring is not a fighter, but a frightened animal. No, then a new question arises. Why did Patterson, knowing about the trap, still allow Ali to get under his skin? Ask yourself honestly, could you keep your composure if every step you took, every word you spoke, was mocked by a genius watched by the entire planet? Patterson couldn't. He went into the fight with one goal, to make Ali shut up, and that became his fatal mistake. Emotion in the ring is poison, and Ali was the best pharmacist in the world. He didn't go for a quick knockout on Patterson. Instead, he staged a public torment. Ali danced around him, shouting insults in the heat of the rounds, turning a championship fight into schoolyard bullying in front of millions. This was the Santa Barbara effect, in its most brutal manifestation. The spectators expected sporting greatness, but got a psychological thriller about the destruction of a personality. You thought Ali fought for justice? In those minutes in the ring, he fought only to see the last spark of self-respect die in Floyd's eyes. But the true apogee of mental terror came in 1967, when Ali faced Ernie Terrell. Terrell committed a mortal sin. He continued to call Ali by his old name, Cassius Clay. The whole world held its breath. Would this be revenge, or just boxing? Ali turned this fight into a ritual execution. Every 3 seconds, as he drove a jab into Terrell's face, he asked the same question that still echoes through sports history. What's my name? It wasn't a question for the sake of an answer. It was a hammer driving Ali's new name into the subconscious of everyone who dared doubt his power. Terrell was physically stronger than Patterson. He stayed on his feet, but his mind was blown from the inside. The situation seemed clear. Ali was punishing him for disrespect. But here's a new twist that will make you shudder. Ali deliberately aimed for Tyrell's eyes not to blind him, but to cause a specific nerve damage that results in double vision. He wanted Tyrell to see two Muhammad Alis, so his nightmare would literally multiply. At one point in the fight, the arena went still as Ali suddenly dropped his hands and just stared at the bloodied Tyrell. In that silence, there was no sympathy. There was only the cold curiosity of a scientist observing the agony of a test subject. Why didn't he deliver the final blow? Because the final blow is mercy, and Ali knew no mercy that night. He wanted Tyrell to live with this humiliation every second of the rest of his life. And at that moment, the white silk handkerchief left in the locker room takes on a new meaning. It was clean, not because Ali was neat, but because he never entered a real fight. He only conducted someone else's pain. Do you still believe this was just a sport? Or are you starting to see, behind the mask of a legend, the face of a man who realized that the most terrifying prison is the one you build in the head of your enemy? But even this master of control had one weakness, a detail he missed, and which would soon force him to find himself in the role of the victim. Are you ready to see what happens when a manipulator faces someone who has no nerve endings at all? The answer to this question is hidden in the silence that will fall before the greatest shock of his career. October 30th, 1974, Kinshasa, Zaire. 4 a.m. The humid, sticky heat of the tropical night mixes with the smell of fear emanating from 60,000 people gathered at the Stade du 20 Mai. The whole world is frozen at their screens, expecting the imminent death of a legend. Standing against Muhammad Ali is George Foreman, a 25-year-old monster who doesn't just win fights, he destroys lives. Foreman has just literally smeared Frazier and Norton, the men who nearly killed Ali. Bookmakers give Ali 10-1 odds, but look at him. He isn't running around the ring as he promised. He is doing something insane, something that makes his trainer, Angelo Dundee, scream in horror. Ali leans against the ropes, covers his head with his hands, and allows Foreman to drive punches into his body, capable of smashing through a concrete wall. Why did he voluntarily turn himself into a punching bag? It seems like the end. But look at Ali's left boxing boot. There, deep under the lacing, is hidden that same tiny scrap of paper he clutched in his hand in Miami 10 years ago. This dagger, this small detail, is now pulsing in time with his heart, reminding him of a secret he hasn't revealed even to his closest associates. Does he really believe a piece of paper will save him from fists that break ribs with a single touch? Every 30 seconds, Foreman unleashes a series of punches that make the entire ring shudder. Spectators close their eyes, not wanting to see the idol of millions turned into a bloody pulp. But Ali keeps standing. He hangs on the ropes, using their elasticity to absorb the energy of the blows. This is the rope-a-dope tactic, but at that moment no one knew the term. Everyone thought Ali was just too old and too scared to resist. But was it fear? In the middle of the 7th round, the first pattern break occurs. Ali suddenly leans into Foreman's very ear, ignoring the hail of punches, and whispers something that makes the champion's hands drop for a moment. "George, is that all you've got? You hit like a girl." Ask yourself honestly, what would you feel if you put all your rage into a punch and your enemy just laughed in your face? In that moment, Foreman realized a terrifying thing. He wasn't fighting flesh and blood. He was fighting a ghost that fed on his exhaustion. Ali was sucking the life out of him, round after round, turning his power into his own curse. The 8th round begins, and suddenly, silence. This wasn't a normal pause. It was visual silence, created by Ali himself. The stadium, which a second ago was roaring with bloodlust, suddenly went quiet, as if someone had pressed the mute button on the remote of the universe. The only thing audible was the hum of the red-hot lights over the ring, and Foreman, this titan, breathing with a heavy, whistling wheeze like the sound of a braking mechanism. In this silence, the air became so thick you could feel it on your skin. Ali slowly, almost solemnly, pulls away from the ropes. His movements now are not chaotic. They are terrifyingly precise. Time slows down to the state of resin. Have you ever seen a century-old oak tree collapse? First comes a deep crack, and then absolute silence before the final fall. Foreman swings for one last desperate blow, putting the remnants of his dignity into it. Ali could have dodged and delivered a crushing uppercut, ending everything in a bloodbath. But he does something non-standard, something that goes beyond the bounds of sport. The legend's action in this moment is striking. Ali shows no anger. When Foreman misses and begins to tumble forward, losing his balance, Ali doesn't hit him in the back of the head. He momentarily places a hand on his shoulder, a gesture almost resembling an embrace or a blessing. This was the ultimate form of psychological sadism. To show the enemy that you are so far above him that you can afford to be kind at the moment of his collapse. And then follows a lightning-fast series, 5 punches that no one had time to count. Foreman begins to sink to the canvas in a slow spiral. The arena is still silent. All that is heard is the dull, heavy thud of the champion's body hitting the tarp. Ali doesn't throw up his hands. He doesn't jump for joy. He just stands over the fallen giant and looks down with a sort of frightening, almost parental sadness. What was he looking for in Foreman's eyes at that second? Was he checking to see if his note had worked? In that moment, the whole world realized Ali didn't win this fight with his fists. He won it at the moment he made Foreman believe he was a god. And gods don't feel pain. But what price did he pay for this illusion? And what was actually written on that scrap of paper he had kept so carefully all these years? The answer to that question will make you shudder, because Ali's true darkness was only beginning to manifest in the rays of the Zairian sun. Are you ready to find out what happened when the silence finally exploded with the roar of the crowd, and Ali realized he could never be just a man again? When the roar of the Zairian crowd finally died down, and Muhammad Ali was left alone in the sterile silence of the locker room, something happened that no camera in the world captured. He didn't jump with delight or scream about his greatness. He simply sat on the bench, feeling the adrenaline slowly wash out of his veins, leaving behind a frightening void. In that moment, he slowly opened his fist, which still clutched that very graphite pencil fragment, our dagger that had traveled with him through years of mental warfare. Were you waiting for the final stage to reveal a secret code or a tactical plan scrawled on a scrap of paper? Here comes your intellectual orgasm, because the truth is much more terrifying. On all those pieces of paper he used to scare Liston, Patterson, and Foreman, there was not a single word. The pencil had never touched the paper. Ali simply knew that if he looked at a blank sheet, with the air of a man who knows the date of your death, your own brain would write the most terrifying scenario there. He didn't defeat them with his strength. He forced their imagination to commit suicide right in the ring. It was the highest level of psychological abuse, to create a vacuum and allow the enemy to fill it with their own fears. But now, look at what happened years later, when the spotlights finally went out. The Santa Barbara effect manifests here in its most tragic form. We are used to seeing Ali as a freedom fighter, but ask yourself, at what price did that freedom come for his rivals? Joe Frazier, the man who gave Ali part of his health in the Thrilla in Manila, could not hear Muhammad's name without a tremor in his voice until the end of his days. Ali didn't just beat him, he annihilated his personality, calling him a gorilla and an ugly thing, so often that Frazier began to see that monster in the mirror. This wasn't sport. This was a vivisection of human dignity. Ali collected a gallery of broken destinies from the strongest people on the planet, leaving them to live out their days in the shadow of his grandiose myth. It seemed he emerged victorious from every battle, but here the plot takes its final, most painful somersault. In the final phase of silence, we see Ali, shackled by Parkinson's disease. He who turned his voice into the most lethal weapon of the 20th century, found himself locked in the absolute silence of his own body. It was an ironic and cruel resolution. The master of psychological noise ended his life a prisoner of the silence he once used to break others. But even in this state, he continued to dominate. His trembling hands and motionless face became his last great performance. He made the whole world feel guilty for enjoying his cruelty. We thought we were watching boxing, but in reality, we were accomplices in the most massive psychological experiment in history, where one man proved charisma is not a gift. It is a form of power that can be as destructive as a nuclear explosion. His legacy is not just gold medals. It is thousands of pages of psychiatric analysis and the broken lives of those who had the misfortune of being in his path. That very pencil he kept eventually became the symbol of his life. He erased the boundaries between reality and show, between sport and terror. Ali showed us that man is a dopamine addict, ready to forgive any cruelty if it is packaged in a beautiful rhyme and a dazzling smile. He was the first to realize that in the television age, truth doesn't matter. All that matters is who denies it with more confidence. He didn't just break them before the bell. He continued to break them decades later, forcing us to argue about his sanctity while his victims' bodies have long since turned to dust. And now that you know that behind every joke of his was the cold calculation of a predator, and behind every prophetic note was absolute emptiness, answer one question. Whose side are you on in this story? Do you consider Ali a supreme genius who used psychology as the only way to survive in a cruel world? Or was he a common moral sadist who hid his darkness behind the mask of a legend? And now the most important thing, did you notice that tiny detail at the beginning of our story that explains why Ali never looked in the mirror before a fight? Write in the comments at what minute you realized that Ali's true opponent was never Liston or Foreman, but the monster he himself grew inside of him. I'm waiting for your theories in the comments. Let's see which of you is truly attentive to the details of this mental thriller.